Hi, welcome to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. It's Wednesday, January 7th, and I'm Jessica Steinberg. I'm speaking today with political correspondent Sam Sokol. Hello, good morning.
Hey, Jessica, good morning.
Hey there. It is day 824 of the war. An ultra-Orthodox teenager was killed and others injured after a bus ran over Haredi protestors in Jerusalem last night. We'll discuss the latest details in that tragic incident and what led to it. Stay with us.
3 million Israelis are dealing with trauma since October 7th. To help Israelis heal, Hadassah is there, with the largest rehabilitation center in Jerusalem, world-renowned medical centers, and youth villages. It's said, saving a life saves the world. Imagine helping millions. This is Hadassah, a life-changing force in Israel and the world.
Okay, Sam, let's start with you this morning. You were covering the mass rally last night. It was a mass rally against IDF conscription. It was in Jerusalem, and it seems to be at the end of the night, at the end of a very intensive protest, that a bus was attacked by rioters. That appears to be, from the preliminary investigation, rioters who were blocking the road, and then the bus driver fatally ran over the teenager and injured several others. Let's start with that, which of course is in the headlines this morning in Hebrew media, in our media. Tell us what you know about that part of the evening.
Well, outside of the main protest area, down Yerushalayim's Rehov Yirmiyahu, were multiple fires that were set by demonstrators outside of the main demonstration, mostly teenagers, young men. There were small children running around, kids as young as like 8 or 9. And every
What time
few
was this?
blocks, most of the night has honestly blurred together. It was an intense evening.
Yeah,
But
it was later.
it was later in the evening, and I had left the main protest. I'm walking down, and every block or so there's another fire, a dumpster being burned, kids running around unsupervised, just hundreds upon hundreds of teenagers. And I arrived on the scene where the ramming incident had occurred. After it occurred, it was at first unclear to me what had happened. I heard ambulances, and there was a wounded teenager on the sidewalk. Right after I arrived, paramedics came up, started treating him and putting him in an ambulance to bring him to the hospital. And I asked, several eyewitnesses what had happened, and they had told me that he had attempted, along with several other people, to block traffic, to sit in front of the bus to prevent it from moving, and
On the street.
And this was in one lane they were attempting to block traffic. In the other lane there was a burning dumpster which was melting into a puddle of plastic. And the eyewitness reports were consistent with the video that eventually surfaced later in the night, which showed just a large mob of Haredi boys and teens surrounding the bus, which at first started to back up. According to Hebrew media reports, the driver actually called the police ahead of the incident, stating that he was in fear. And the preliminary police investigation has said that the driver had been under attack. What we know happened at that point for sure is that the driver drove through the crowd. There's footage of the driver driving with people hanging on to the front bumper, and he drove for hundreds of meters around two different corners.
They're hanging on the bus?
They were just, in the front, being pushed along sort of on the bottom lip of the bus. And he drove for hundreds of meters, eventually coming to a stop a couple of streets over. And that's where the police and emergency workers were working to try to extricate the victim from underneath the bus. I arrived on the scene down there to see rescue workers. I managed to get close for several seconds before being pushed back with the rest of the crowd down the block, physically pushed and dragged by police. And it was a very, very strange atmosphere because there was definitely anger. There was definitely a great deal of resentment. But at the same time, there was, I hesitate to use the word, but almost a carnival atmosphere, meaning people were out, something was happening, they were trying to figure out
Even
what was
during
going
this
on,
tragedy that was unfolding.
meaning it wasn't something celebratory, but it was just that there's something happening, let's go out and see it. I sat down at the steps of a nearby yeshiva, and many of the students, both Israelis and a contingent of American students, kept coming up to me, asking me for whatever information I could get. People were angry, people were scared, people were really desperate for any sort of information. The yeshiva students asked me at least 5 or 6 times to replay the video from Twitter of the attack itself. But throughout the night, there were just hundreds upon hundreds, even thousands of just unaccompanied, unsupervised young men. As I said, some of them very, very young, just standing around the streets, surrounding the area. They had to be pushed back by police multiple times. It was just a very, very strange atmosphere. And, yeah, it's very, very sort of hard to describe. You would have expected it to be much more angry after this. And at one point, several young men in their early teens began to shout Nazi at the police. They almost immediately stopped. They actually started giggling when I started to try and film them. And several people started singing anti-enlistment songs and immediately fell silent within like a one verse. So it was mostly just a huge mob of people standing around, schmoozing to each other, talking to each other, trying to figure out what the hell was going on.
What happened before the tragic incident? In other words, this happened, let's say, around, it seemed to me around 9:30 at night, perhaps something around like that, between 8 and 9. But what was happening earlier in the protests? What was the mood like? How many people were out there? This is not the first protest, anti-IDF conscription protest, but what was the mood like in this one?
So the mood at the main protest, several blocks away, was,
Right.
much
Which
darker.
is, by the way, just for listeners, is near the central bus station in Jerusalem. That's the general area that we're talking about here.
Yeah,
right?
the Romema neighborhood. Now, the main protest, there was a little bit more of an angry undertone. People in the ultra-Orthodox community are enraged by the idea of being required to do military service like other Israelis. And recently we had a large protest with 200,000 or so people in
Right.
Jerusalem, run by the mainstream ultra-Orthodox community. But this protest that we had was run by more of the extreme elements of the ultra-Orthodox community. It was mostly representatives of Hasidic groups and Sephardi rabbis. The more extreme of the Sephardi rabbis, the mainstream Sephardic Shas party actually supports the government's enlistment bill, which would exempt most yeshiva students, actually, so more of an exemption bill. But the people at this protest, including the extremist so-called Jerusalem faction, were protesting not only against the government, but also against the ultra-Orthodox politicians. There were flyers everywhere saying that Shas chairman Aryeh Deri was selling out the Haredim by trying to agree to anything that wasn't, a complete exemption for every Haredi person from military service. Speaker after speaker railed against secular Israelis and Zionism and military service. and there was a press area in front of the main dais where the rabbis were sitting. And beyond that, on the other side, outside a fence, tens of thousands of ultra-Orthodox men. And every single time that I or another journalist would try to take a photo of the crowd with a smartphone rather than, a professional camera, hundreds and hundreds of Haredim would begin yelling at us. I was screamed at by hundreds of Haredi men. It was rather disconcerting. I saw, at one point, the crowd became so great that it strained against the barricades, actually overspilled the barricades, and filled the press and rabbinic area. And I saw a Haredi demonstrator knock the smartphone out of one man's hands. Every time I tried to film the rabbis, people would grab my arms or yell at me. There was definitely an undercurrent of extreme resentment and anger. And I
Is
think
there
that
any way,
goes.
Sam, is there any way of knowing, impossible given tens of thousands, of course, but is there any way for you to discern if the crowd is made up of these more extreme factions, or was it a more generic Haredi rally? Any way to know that?
Just based on the tone, the rhetoric, and who was speaking, it definitely felt like it was more representative of the extremes. But look, the truth is, it's very hard to tell when you have tens of thousands of people wearing black suits and white shirts in the middle of the night in a giant crowd. You're not
Yeah,
asking each one which group do you belong to.
of
Uh,
course. Right.
you get a sense of it when you know the Haredi community based on the shape of the hats and things like that. So it definitely felt like it, but it's very hard to say. But as I said, there was definitely this undertone of anger and resentment, and I think that played into what happened with the bus, with the teenagers surrounding the buses. It gave them a feeling of license to set things on fire, to block traffic. Uh, you know, there was very little adult supervision. At one point, I saw a full-grown adult man, long beard, the full Haredi getup, walking past a burning dumpster. And instead of telling the kids, don't do this, you shouldn't do this, this is wrong, he was yelling at them, don't enlist, don't enlist, don't enlist.
Hmm.
So, it was
That
a
was the
bit of an
tone.
anarchic atmosphere.
I want to note that the last massive rally, someone else also died in that rally for different reasons. A young man was on top of a crane, I believe, or on top of a building that was under construction, and fell to his death. I remember at the time it was unclear if it was suicidal or an accident. Um, but there is definitely this sense of anarchy at these massive rallies that are against IDF conscription.
Well, I would add to that as the crowd pushed and surged against the metal barricades, some people started to look like they were being crushed. People were pulling themselves and having the friends pull them over the barricades to avoid the crush. And they eventually spilled over, filling this area with hundreds of additional people in the press area. So there was a moment
Like Mount
there,
Meron again. Hmm.
exactly like Matt Maron, where I actually turned to another reporter and said, this has the potential to turn into another Meron, and this is very, very scary. This could end very badly. And thank God that in the main protest it did not. But as we saw, the evening did end very badly.
Very, very badly. Obviously, we'll see what happens with that over the rest of the day, with the other police investigation that comes in. And just one last thing, Sam, we
Yeah.
did not mention the name of the teenager, I believe 14 years old, who
Yeah.
was killed in the by the bus incident. If you could tell us a little
Yeah.
bit about
It's
him.
14-year-old Yosef Eisenthal, a resident of the remote neighborhood of Yerushalayim. Uh, I got a message last night from the Jerusalem faction, Pelek Yerushalmi, saying that his funeral would be this morning, leaving from the yeshiva in which he studied. Uh, and one thing that's really important to add is that one of the first things that happened after this was ultra-Orthodox politicians, especially from the Hasidic Agudat Yisrael party, uh, tying this tragic incident to what they said was anti-Haredi incitement in the media, judiciary, and other spheres. So they immediately came and tied this back to the to the debate over Haredi conscription.
Right. In other words, that's where it all stems from. Okay, Sam, thank you for taking us through it. It's been a very hard night, and certainly a very hard morning, as it will continue to be so.
What if prayer doesn't work? This question strikes us as a distinctly modern one, an outgrowth of the slow disenchantment of the world. But in truth, the question is an old one, and one given space to breathe here.
Welcome to Thoughts and Prayers. I'm your host, Jessica Fisher. Join me on a deep exploration of the relationship between religion and modernity through personal stories, classical texts, and conversations with leading rabbis, scholars, and educators.
You're almost not supposed to be doing this interview.
Our prayers accumulate on God's doorstep, piled outside like an unimaginably tall stack of letters. We cannot give up on the relationship because God doesn't come to the door as quickly as we may like. So let's keep knocking. Perhaps the gates of compassion will be opened.
Join us every week on Thoughts and Prayers, wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks, Sam, for your insights and input as to what happened last night. And thanks to you for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Stay tuned for tomorrow's installment. This episode is produced by the Podwaves. If you have comments about this or other episodes, feel free to drop us an email at podcast@timesvisual.com. Until next time, take care, be well.